You're freezing up every once in a while.
All right. Well, we'll see how it goes, everyone. Welcome to our Packers News free agency live stream alongside Tom Silverstein. I am Olivia Reiner. Congratulations. We all survived the first week of free agency. Before I get to all of that and wrapping up exactly what went down this week, I would like to remind you that you can be a part of our conversation over on our Facebook page. Make sure you get into the comments down there. Ask us your questions. Give us your thoughts, whatever you have to say. I will be taking a look at that toward the end of our show. And I've left plenty of time today to get to some of your questions. So if we haven't answered your question earlier this week, perhaps we can answer it today. So, Tom, let's start with some breaking news. The report came out, and we've been able to confirm that fullback Danny Vitale has agreed to a deal with the Patriots. This past season, he missed the last several games of it due to a knee injury. However, through the 15 games that he did play, he had 7 receptions for 97 yards. He was not a huge centerpiece of this Packers offense, but he certainly was a contributor. How should the Packers approach the fullback position in general this upcoming season?
Probably the same way they did with Vitale, which is to try to find a low-priced younger guy who can come in and give them, I think Vitale played 174 snaps or something like that. That's really what they're looking for. Initially, I think they thought they could use Vitale in a receiving role because he had like 100 catches his senior year at Northwestern, and he had a little bit of that ability. But as Aaron Jones started to blossom in the passing game, there really wasn't a need for him. And they didn't play him on third downs as much. And really it was the Jamal Williams and Aaron Jones show, both running and passing the ball. So Vitale's role got kind of marginalized. And I think, I think they will look for some competition there, young competition. The other thing to remember is that they moved defensive lineman James Looney over there in the middle of the season to see if he could be a H-back/fullback. So they have him. I'm not saying he's going to be the starting fullback, but that's their starting point. They could draft somebody. They could just pick up somebody. It's not an absolute vital position in that offense.
So Looney is, I believe, a tight end. He's been moved there. However, something that we noticed at the end of the season when Danny Vitale wasn't playing was that Jay Sternberger was getting an opportunity to play at that fullback position. What was your evaluation of how Sternberger performed in that role?
Well, he filled a role that I think Robert Tonyan couldn't. Tanyan's a little bigger guy, and both he and Mike McCarthy had a plan where they would use tight ends as fullbacks, and it makes it a little harder for the defense to know what's coming up when they go into the huddle and there's 2 tight ends and they're thinking, it's a 2 tight end offense, but then you throw one in as a fullback. I think that, what Sternberger did was pretty good. And if for some reason Looney came around, he that's the exact same kind of position, an H-back type spot where you can line that guy up at fullback and he can catch out of the backfield or he can block. And Sternberger did a pretty good job blocking, but this coming year, he's got to be their top pass catcher. So I don't think they're going to want him in the backfield too much.
Vitale joins inside linebacker BJ Goodson, inside linebacker Blake Martinez, outside linebacker Kyler Fackrell as the latest wave of Packers to leave Green Bay, Packers that were on the 2019 roster. Let's take a look at what the Packers did do this week. They were busy on Monday adding inside linebacker Christian Kirksey and right tackle Rick Wagner. Over the last couple of days, they've decided to bring back tight end Mercedes Lewis, adding safety Will Redmond. And I almost forgot about kicker Mason Crosby. Technically was also a free agent. The Packers were quick to re-sign him even before the combine. So it has been a little bit quiet as of late I'll put up right now the remaining Packers free agents down at the bottom of our screen on the ticker. Tom, of this list, including guys like cornerback Tramon Williams, right tackle Jared Valdir, who could you envision returning to the Packers from this group?
I think you could still see Valdir, possibly Tramon Williams. After that, I don't know. These guys with the new raised minimums, their salaries are somewhat expensive now. They're range around 910,000, and for Tramon Williams, it's $1,050,000, and Valdir. So I think they have to be a little bit careful with what they do, but I would guess that they're having talks with those guys, and they're kind of just playing this through, and there's no hurry to make a decision. I don't think either guy is on the verge of signing anywhere. I would say those are the top two guys. Geronimo Allison, maybe, but I kind of think that they're going to move on from him. That's my gut feeling.
Let's take a look at news that's been going on around the NFL today. Tight end Eric Ebron is signing with the Steelers on reportedly a 2-year, $12 million deal. When I heard that, I thought of all of our live stream viewers over the last few days. He has been a very popular name among some of you all out there. I've seen a lot in the comments of maybe potentially a landing spot for the Packers. If the Packers weren't willing to bring in a tight end at that price, how likely is it that they're done making major signings in free agency this year?
Probably. I mean, when you say major, I think they're done doing major signings. I think anything now is a third wave type of a signing, and we're talking, no more than $5 million and probably less than that. So I am not that surprised they didn't go for Ebron at that kind of money. I don't know if he fit their locker room environment. Would have fit their offense. He could have been fairly productive in LaFleur's offense, but I don't think they were willing to go to $6 million on him. I think they'll take their chances with Sternberger and Tanyan and whoever they can get in the draft.
The tight end position, as you just mentioned, currently looks like Mercedes Lewis, Jay Sternberger, Robert Tanyan, and Evan Bayless. What does the current state of the group of tight ends on the Packers roster say about how the Packers currently feel about Jay Sternberger, who is coming off of his rookie season?
Well, I think they think a lot of him, and I think they're expecting a big jump in his second year. He's always said that every place he's gone, it's taken him a year to get his feet under him, and then he's taken off after that. I think with a big year in the weight room, he could be their starter. I would think it would be more like him and Mercedes Lewis splitting it, or he and Robert Tanyan splitting time, opposite Mercedes Lewis. So I think, you have three guys there that they can play. I think they're hopeful that Tanyan, now that he's had the core muscle surgery, will be better, faster. I don't think they've given up on him. So that's kind of the core of their tight end group, and then we'll see what they do in the draft. They could do a flyer on somebody like a Jordan Reed, but he's had a bunch of concussions. On a 1-year deal, if there's somebody sitting out there, they could do that, similar to what they did with Mercedes Lewis. But right now, I think they're not feeling that bad about where they're at.
Taking a look at the wide receivers position, it's been a pretty quiet free agency on the receivers front. There was a lot of news on Monday when DeAndre Hopkins was shipped off to Arizona. Amari Cooper re-signed with Dallas. Stephon Diggs in a trade got shipped off to Buffalo. However, there are still a number of free agents available out there on the market, including Robbie Anderson of the Jets, former Bear Taylor Gabriel. How has the depth at receiver in the 2020 draft class that Brian Gutekunst has spoken so highly about, how does that impact free agency this year?
It's totally affected it. It's made the wide receiver position kind of unnoticed in free agency, because just about everybody is expecting to get a wide receiver out of this draft. And I think that's a reason why you see the Vikings willing to give up Stephon Diggs. You know, they got 2 first-round picks, and they're gonna get a receiver out of this draft. Houston probably will too. Everybody who wants one can get one. It's that deep, and it's just a matter of getting the right one. I think if you're Brian Gutekunst, you're just waiting for the market to completely collapse to where one of those wide receivers that you kind of like is willing to take a 1-year prove-it deal that maybe is heavy in incentives and low in base salary, and you go with that. I think the best thing to do is wait it out, because you don't want to wind up overpaying a guy who, in a market that isn't that good.
All right, let's take a look at some of these questions over on Facebook. Hello, everybody. There's so many of you in here. Thank you for joining us all week. We appreciate it. I'll start with Robert's question here. Who is a Packer free agent next year? Sorry, this is worded a little strangely. It looks like, Robert, you're talking about Corey Linsley, David Bakhtiari, and Kenny Clark set to become free agents. We talked about this a few days ago, Tom, especially when it comes to David Bakhtiari and Kenny Clark, and how important it is for the Packers to offer them new deals before their contracts expire in 2021. How do you feel about that, in addition to some of the other impending free agents in 2021?
Well, they absolutely have to get Kenny Clark done, because the longer they wait, the harder it's going to be and the more money it's going to be. And so I think they have planned for it. I think they've had discussions about it with Kenny Clark's agent, and I think they're going to try to get that deal done. It'll be big, and it'll probably raise Kenny Clark's cap number. They'll try to keep it as close to what it is now, which is like $7.9 million, but it's going to be really hard to keep it where it's at. Bakhtiari, I think that's a deal they could do, and that they could cut some off of his salary cap number, which is like $14 million. You know, they could guarantee a lot of that money and structure it such that they could drop that cap number down quite a bit. So with that money, then, you know, they might have the room to re-sign Aaron Jones. That's a big one, a guy who's going to be a free agent. Linsley is going to be a free agent. Jamal Williams is going to be a free agent. So you've got some guys who you want to retain, some really big ones in Bakhtiari, Clark, and Jones.
It's a long list, and Brian Gutekunst will have his work cut out for him starting now when it comes to free agency next season. Thank you, Robert, for your question. Here's a question that we answered yesterday, but why don't we just go on and talk about it again? Chris asks, would former Green Bay Packer, former LA Ram Clay Mathews come back to Green Bay to play inside linebacker? Tom, he has primarily played outside linebacker in his career. We know currently on the roster, there's Preston and Zadarius Smith, Rashawn Gary at outside linebacker. However, the Packers would probably like to have another outside linebacker for insurance there. What about inside linebacker, with the needs that they have there, only having a handful of players at the position there now? How likely is it that A, they would want him back, and B, that he would be willing to move to inside linebacker?
Well, B first. I think he would be willing to come back. I think he wanted to come back last year and was willing to come back at a reasonable price. Was kind of surprised they weren't interested. I do think he would come back. Whether he would play middle linebacker, I think at this stage in his career, I don't think there's nothing to gain. You know, earlier in his career, he loved the sacks. He liked being in the limelight. He liked piling up the numbers for sacks. Now, you know, he's in the twilight of his career. He's 33 years old. I'm guessing a Super Bowl would be more important to him at this point. And if they could get him to play inside linebacker, I think they should do it. I just don't know whether they think he has anything left. Some people I trust, NFL people I trust, say he does, and that it would be a good fit for him to play inside. They could rush him up the middle. They could use him to give Preston and Zadarius Smith breaks. I mean, it gives you a heck of a lot of flexibility to have a guy who's played outside linebacker, inside linebacker, is rushed inside over the center. He can do pretty much anything, or has been able to in the past. He's not going to be the Clay Mathews he once was, but they're looking for a one-year solution to this inside linebacker position. And until they can develop a real solid starter, it wouldn't hurt to bring in a guy like Clay Mathews.
I'll play devil's advocate with you, Tom, because I spoke to Jim Ozarski, asked him a very similar question yesterday, and he had a much more pessimistic outlook. Perhaps pessimistic isn't the right word. He didn't think that it would happen. And that was because of the way that the Packers had Rashawn Gary in at outside linebacker. And if Clay Mathews wasn't willing to move into inside linebacker and wanted to stay on the outside, how would they get Rashawn Gary on the field ahead of Clay Mathews?
They wouldn't sign him if he wouldn't play inside. That's my guess. I don't think they would sign him as an outside linebacker. They don't need that. They want to get younger players in. But if they could get him to play inside linebacker with Kirksey, I think they might have something there. And so they'd have to get a commitment from him that he was willing to do that. Rashawn Gary is going to play. Rashawn Gary is in their plans. He's going to be on the field. Clay Mathews is not taking, if he were to sign, would not take any snaps away from Rashawn Gary. I mean, that is a guy they are determined to get on the field. The toughest thing for him is having Zadarius and Preston Smith ahead of him. I think with Clay Mathews, if they did bring him back, he'd play inside, and then he would probably play the role that Kyler Fackrell played, which is the number 3 or number 4 outside linebacker. And I think he'd be number 4 because Gary is going to be number 3.
We shall see what the Packers ultimately decide to do with Clay Mathews, if they do anything. Thank you for your question, Chris. I want to take this other one from Robert here. He asks, what about wide receivers Marquez Valdez-Scantling and Equanimeous St. Brown? We haven't spoken very much about Equanimeous St. Brown, who suffered a season-ending injury back in training camp last season. He was coming off of a pretty strong first year with the Packers and ultimately suffered a season-ending blow. What are your expectations for him coming into 2020?
Well, if his ankle is back to normal, then I think he's in the mix for maybe the number 3 spot, depending on what direction they go in the draft. I'm sure they would like to, if they got a first-round pick, they'd want to put him in the lineup as their number 2 behind Adams. Or if they signed a veteran, then whatever. But I think he's the type of guy who can come in and be sort of a better version of Alan Lazard, a guy who can probably do a little bit more with the ball after the catch. And having a couple of big guys like that would be, I think that would be ideal. They need to find out how healthy he's going to be, though, whether he can still run, whether that injury did anything to, him physically. But he's a big, strong guy that showed he was willing to run over the middle and could catch in traffic.
We'll see exactly how he fares this upcoming season in training camp coming off of this injury. Thank you, Robert, for bringing this one up. Victor asks, perhaps he was in our live stream earlier this week, Tom, when you discussed the possibility of the Packers cutting left guard Lane Taylor as a way for them to save some cap space in 2020. It would free up about $4 million, $4.5 million in cap space if the Packers decided to cut Lane Taylor. Victor says, however, instead of cutting Lane Taylor, do you think he could be traded for a draft pick or depth at wide receiver? What would his value be in the trade market, Tom?
Well, it wouldn't be great because he's coming off that torn biceps muscle. And there's a lot of teams who would be a little bit wary about that. He's got some value because he's played in this league, and he needs to be in the right offense. He needs to be in an offense that runs the ball and doesn't run the wide zone. It's more of a inside zone team. I think there could be some value. They could get a late round pick for him if they tried to trade him. I don't know if they are trying to do that or if anyone's even interested, but I wouldn't expect much. I think he's more of a wait and see kind of guy. I think I would be surprised if anybody gave up a lot because of that injury.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we'll see about that. Mike here asks, let's see. Thank you for the question, Victor. Mike would like to see Rashawn Gary play at defensive end. We've talked about this, I believe, in the past. I don't know if it was this week, Tom, or if it has been in live streams past, that because it has been brought up by some of our live stream viewers, why not move Rashawn Gary inside? Your counterpoint, I believe, to that is, why not actually, instead of trying to line him up inside, why not even put him on that defensive line? How likely is it that Rashawn Gary would try to get some snaps there at defensive end?
Well, so we have to kind of break this up into how Mike Pettine plays his defense. So if we're talking defensive end, then we're saying he would be a defensive end in the 3-4 in their base defense. They would have 3 defensive linemen on the field, 2 outside linebackers, 2 inside linebackers. Now, they don't play that a whole lot. I forgot what the percentage was, but it's like 15% of the time or something like that. So, yes, he could absolutely play end in that position. And I think they see him doing that more. Now, if they're going to go with him inside in the nickel when they've just got 4 guys and they have the 2 outside linebackers and Kenny Clark, then it's a little more difficult to play him on running downs, on early downs. I think he's about 275 pounds, something like that. Clark's 305. I mean, I don't know that down after down that he could handle that. I think they could do that on second down or third down, and use him in that rotation. But it would be hard, I think, for him to play some first downs when they go into that nickel and they only have 4 guys across the line.
It's an interesting thought there, Mike. So thank you for bringing that up. This thought here from Lindsay is also quite interesting. She suggests someone that we haven't really spoken about much on any of our live streams. She says, or maybe this is a he, I can't really tell. So many genders. This wonderful person says, I think the big tackle free agent from Virginia Tech, Yosh Nijman, will be a monster if he's coached up, and a 10-year starter. That is a very strong endorsement there.
Mm-hmm.
Let's talk about Yosh for a moment. The Packers promoted him from the practice squad late in the season last year, and he was on their roster, didn't get to play at all. How likely is it that he even sees the field in this upcoming season?
Well, those are hard predictions to make because you're talking about a guy who's fairly raw, very raw, great athletic ability, is great feet, big man, can move. They liked what they saw of him in camp. He's just not a refined player. And so what they would want is the best case scenarios. They come into camp and he's just taken this huge step and he's playing really consistently. And he's showing that, man, he could compete with Rick Wagner for that right tackle spot. I think that's the hope with him. But I think it's a little bit of a pipe dream because I think he's still got a ways to go to get to where he could play regularly in the NFL. They thought he could back up. I mean, they don't put a guy on the 53-man roster if he can't play. So they do think fairly highly of him. I just don't know if he's ready, if he'll be ready for a starting job. And it does probably hurt him that there's no off-season workouts this year and probably won't be any.
Right, especially since he was placed on injured reserve toward the end of the season. But we'll see if he's able to even compete for a starter job against Rick Wagner at that right tackle spot. So wonderful. Thank you, everyone, for joining us once again on Friday. This our lovely last live stream of the week. We will be back. We'll be deciding exactly what our schedule is in the upcoming weeks as free agency continues. However, we do like getting to connect with you during this difficult time when we are all so separated from each other. So it's been really nice for us to check in with you all and see how you're all feeling, talk some football, and try to feel like life is normal right now when it doesn't really feel normal at all. So thank you once again, everyone. Make sure you're checking out PackersNews.com for all of your Packers coverage. Follow us on social media as well. We have lots of updates over on our social media channels. Hopefully you're following us everywhere. Thanks again, everyone. Have a great rest of your night, and we'll see you next time.